So we're into the Q&A session. I'll just summarise the sort of wide and varied presentations we've had in this session. We've talked about issues around housing associations and fuel poverty. We've looked at heat pump technology, the challenges for councils in implementing energy efficiency and renewable technologies, how homeowners can make changes and save money, and also behaviour change in doing the right thing. So I'm going to open the floor up for the next 10 to 15 minutes if anybody has any questions. Any hands up? There's somebody over there, a lady in the black. Okay, thank you. Does anybody like to respond from the panel? Yeah.
Thanks. But I agree with your comment, and it's an important point that there's a lot of very fine historic buildings in Scotland that are integral to the urban environment. I myself live in Edinburgh and Marchmont, and you wouldn't really want that clad in external wall insulation, I don't think. There are a couple of examples of associations improving historic buildings. I mentioned the Lister Cooperative Scheme, which was done with the cooperation of, I think, Historic Scotland, Change Works and Edinburgh Council. There's been a couple of pilots where very fine types of insulation have been put into properties, and they've made a real difference. But I would say, while it's true that we can improve historic buildings and it is possible, funding's a real challenge. You know, the Lister Cooperative improvements aren't something that could easily be done across Scotland without, as Jim was saying, just the step change in the level of investment that goes into energy efficiency. And the second big challenge often for associations is the mixed tenure issue. It can be very difficult to make big changes to a tenement building without the cooperation of other owners. You can do certain things internally that make improvements, but if you want to do district heating, if you want to improve the communal areas, I think there's a need for regulation and funding are the two key things, I think, that need to be improved so that we can follow the example of Historic Scotland and some associations and see it, rather than, I suppose, being pilots or pockets of excellence, see these improvements be something that happens across the piece.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Any other questions? While you're thinking about it, I'll pose a question. I guess, does the panel think that incentives are required to encourage people to install maybe upgraded boilers or renewable technology? Is that the only way to do it, do you think?
I think it's one of the ways of doing it. I think it can often be valuable as a pump primer to get markets started. But actually, I've got to say, incentives scare me enormously. When you see the mess that's being caused by long-term structural incentives given to insulation, for example, when that funding is withdrawn, the market has got into a position where it's actually untenable commercially. And we must never, ever get into that position. So it's kind of obtuse because, we're benefiting fantastically from the renewable heat incentive at the moment. But my terror is that becomes institutionalized. It has to be do a job and then go. This has to be normal for us, not special, in my view.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor?
Yes, every day.
Yeah, there's somebody in the back corner there. Yeah.
Thanks, Rod Burns, National Records of Scotland. Neville mentioned, I think, a figure of 26% of people who won't do rather than can't do or will do. And it seems to me that the will do people clearly will do. The people who can't do are either trainable or persuadable. But how do you deal with that hardcore of people who've got perhaps a principled objection? And climate change would be one good example where you do get hardcore of people who simply will not philosophically accept that anything needs to be done. How do you deal with that, crack that nut of the 20% of people who are just opposed to what you want to do?
Let me say it's not that easy. However, what you need to do is to show those individuals, because what won't do is traditionally saboteurs. They may be achieving, but they're saboteuring what's going on, mainly because it could be their beliefs aren't really that strong in what you're trying to do, in which case, have you ever tried to take a horse to water? It's those sort of issues. But interesting enough, the won't do people, the defensive people, if you take them on the journey to explain exactly what's going on, you'll be quite surprised how quickly they do change.
Can I, just to kind of pick up from Neville's point of, especially with social housing, you have a wide, diverse range of stakeholders from the housing officers, the maintenance guys, the tenants and the financial directors. They have very, very different clear drivers. And especially with tenants, the first thing that you get is that this is something that the council have to do because the council have to do it, not because it's going to benefit the tenant. And so you have to look at the drivers. At the end of the day, climate change does not impact on a lot of people. A comment we hear frequently in certain areas is, why do you want to give me this system? I'm not interested. I'm 85 years old. I'll be dead soon. It's those kind of things. It's kind of leave me alone. But everyone has their own drivers in life, and it's just understanding that and actually taking the time to listen. And I think that's a key thing, really, is take the time to listen. Don't assume that what your view is the right view and the only view. And actually, when you start to dig in deeper, there are a lot of additional benefits that you didn't realise you had in the first instance that become very clear and actually can be just as powerful as climate change. As you can't stand up in front of a tenant and say, we've got to get to SHQS, we've got to achieve each. Well, we have to, but that doesn't impact on me. So it's changing yourself and it's adapting to what there is. And, and then it's bringing them people on, and the biggest joy that I think I get a lot of the time is taking the people that have got those inbuilt reservations and taking them on the journey with us and give them that sense of empowerment and entitlement. And you get the eco warriors that we have. These are tenants, these are normal people that can actually go and, they come to the factory, they see how they're made, and then they're engaged. And I think that's it. We have to be very clear that we are always, doesn't matter where you're working, who you're working with, you have to engage on their level, whether that be high level financial or just the tenant who just wants a nice warm house and low energy bills.
Jim, do you want to make a point?
Yeah, it seems to me there are certainly two aspects to this. Someone mentioned earlier that it's a hearts and minds issue. Well, it is, but only at the start. I mean, I've managed big departments, 1,500 people, and there were constantly change, behaviour, transformational programmes and so forth. And it always seemed to me that there were at least two aspects to that. The first was the hearts and minds bit. We're planning to do this. Who thinks it's a good idea? And you get a bit of an upsurge of people saying, yeah, we should introduce IIP or whatever it is they're doing because it will benefit everyone. But over time, the momentum dissipates. And then there's a decision to be made. Is this so important that we can't leave it to chance? And then I think there has to be some sanctions for non-compliance. And I think that's the other side of the hearts and mind. Now, the government has started with the social landlord sector in Scotland, and everybody knows why, because to all intents and purposes, government can control councils and housing associations. It can compel us in a lot of ways to do things, and that's exactly what EISH is. It's a standard that we've signed up to, even although we agreed after a bit of negotiation. But then you get to the tougher end of it. There are 300,000 or thereabouts tenants who live in the private rented sector, whose landlords have got a big financial vested interest in the status quo. So you tell a landlord that they have to invest £5,000 or £6,000 to bring a tenant's home, where there's maybe children living there too, up to a basic standard. A landlord will say, can I increase the rent to recover my costs? Only within reason and only so far as the local housing allowance allows. Are there grants available to do this? Well, there may be, but ultimately a landlord might say, well, I'm not doing that because I need to have my rate of return. It's then a societal question. Do we as a society think that it's acceptable for that situation to remain? So it's then I think that the concept of regulation and standards has to be there, and we have to be serious about implementing it. It would be great if everyone comes with us and we didn't need that, but I think the history of regulation and legislation shows that sometimes we have to put in these standards. We have to share the cost, because the state's got a big interest in this, and we are imposing restrictions on individuals. But I think the way that we will see the step change in the future is when we have regulations and people realise they're serious about this, they're going to make it stick. We give the information about the financial benefits. Tim's argument was compelling. Do small things and you might see big benefits. But regulation, I think, will have to be a part of that if we're to sit here in 5 or 10 years and say, yep, things look a lot different than they did that time we gathered back in 2015.
Right, thanks, Jim. Time for one more question, if anybody's got a burning question that they want to ask. Yes, in the middle.
Mine is just many years ago, I used to work in high-end construction projects. I worked with Scottish widows in Edinburgh. And one of the things I did there, I said, who do you get your electricity from? He said, one of the big Scottish companies. He said, why don't you let me negotiate with the Scottish suppliers and see what you can get electricity. After about 6 months, we reduced their electricity bill by 2/3. And that to one particular company, and he said, oh, if you're going to use that much, this is the type of discount you're going to get. Now, I'm just thinking in terms of what these guys have said just now, well, why don't we use some of that natural thinking by councils and say, instead of all the households in a council border, why not let the council buy the total electricity and then get these huge discounts from the
Interesting point.
because you know, there's only a thing on the TV. I think it was back in the last week where it said the big energy companies are actually freezing long-term householders by up to £200 over the last 10 years for being loyal customers. Now, that seems to be one kind of incentives to get householders into this market by the councils saying, well, look, if you join our club and do these things, we can then offer you this discount on your electricity and just try to make the circular economy work to the advantage of this climate change requirement.
Very interesting. I think. Do you want to make a point on that?
Yeah, I'd wanted to come back. I think that's an absolutely excellent suggestion. There's actually a grouping of associations in Scotland who are looking at setting up their own energy supply company, and really for the reasons you're talking about. Customers who have stayed with the original supplier over a long period of time are effectively being overcharged. Customers who are in poverty are often expected to pay by card, which means they actually pay a higher rate than they would do if it was you or I paying on direct debit. And so this company called Our Power is actually in the process of being formed, and quite a lot of it is about reducing bills, but quite a lot of it's also about providing a better level of service to tenants. And what they're looking to do is initially through taking empty properties and then turning them over to having energy supplied by them is to gradually increase their business. But I agree, I think it's something that associations and councils could look to intervene in and could perhaps look to provide a better service than currently often exists.
Tim, do you want to make a point?
Yeah, great idea. If you want to see a really good working example, Manchester got a brilliant scheme where they have negotiated a price with one energy company, which they then offer to any citizen sitting within that district. You can sign up, you know, if you choose to do. And it works wonderfully well. I'd urge you to have a look at that one.
Okay. And
great
Jim,
idea.
Do you want to make a point, Jim?
Yeah, just briefly, let me join the chorus of approval. I too think it's a cracking idea. I think it would be great on the social side if we got the scale by combining councils with housing associations, and for that reason we've had the organisation Our Power along to speak to councils, and my understanding now that there's 3 or 4 big councils also interested in combining and putting their weight behind the housing association model, because clearly the more people, the more momentum, dare I say it, the more power they have behind it. And I take David's point, it's not just about undercutting or providing the lowest price, it's about other guarantees about service delivery and keeping that service both improving and constant over time. So a really good point, and that is something I think we could keep tabs on in future years about how well that's progressing.
Great. I think that wraps up this session. Many thanks to the speakers and presenters today. I think we give a round of applause and show our appreciation. So we're going to break now for, well, about 25 minutes. If we get back here for 3:40 for the final session, that'd be great. Thank you.